You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writing Black. I am your host, Maiysha Kai, lifestyle editor here at theGrio. And this is a very, very special episode for me because unlike almost all of our other episodes, I got to do this one in person, and I got to do it with three incredible writers. I was invited to moderate a panel for the LATimes Book Festival this year, and the panel was called Arts and Culture, Telling My Own Story. Now, that alone should tell you that this is going to be a very special episode, but my three guests were three incredible people, some of whom you might know as writers, some of whom you might not. In fact, one of those writers was Ty Hunter. Now, if you are a fashion person, you likely know Ty Hunter as the longtime stylist of Destiny's Child and Beyonce. He now is the stylist for Billy Porter. But Ty is also a first-time author, having put out his own memoir, Makeover from Within, Lessons in Hardship, Acceptance, and Self-Discovery, which was published by Chronicle Books. If you follow Ty, you know he is a Texan, like our favorite Queen Bee. And his book is about his journey from a young, confused kid in Austin, Texas, to working with some of the biggest stars in the world and all of the ups and downs that came with that. It's a fascinating story, so much deeper than you might imagine, and he is just an amazing person to talk with. And he joined us on this panel. Alongside him was Clarkisha Kent. Clarkisha Kent is a Nigerian-American writer, culture critic, columnist, and she is now also the author of Fat Off, Fat On, a Big Bitch Manifesto, published by Feminist Press. You know, Clarkisha's so interesting. What she's accomplished before the tender age of 30 is amazing in and of itself, but what she reveals in her memoir is such a candid and poignant backstory, and one that I think a lot of people will really relate to, and hearing her talk about it was just so insightful and inspiring. Also inspiring is the book Black Chameleon, Memory, Womanhood, and Myth by Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton. If you know Deborah, she's an internationally known writer, director, performer, critic, and the first Black poet laureate of Houston, Texas. And Black Chameleon is one of the most fascinating memoirs I've probably ever read. For its format alone, it's told like a book of fables or myths that really center womanhood and Blackness and beauty and parenthood, and she wrote it as a way to explain certain aspects of life to her own child, and that's one of the most beautiful things about the narrative. But what was really striking about our collective conversation, which took place on the campus of the University of Southern California, is that each of these authors, you know, finding their way to telling their story. There's challenges, there's a lot of craft and process that is revealed, and there's also a cathartic nature to telling your own story. And whether or not you feel that your story is worthy is one thing, but I think in the end, the takeaway for me was that there's no wrong way to tell your story. So without further ado, let's get into this incredible conversation with Ty, Clarkisha, and Deborah. That brings me to a question that I'm going to direct to all of you, which is that, you know, we all have a story to tell, but having the confidence to tell the story, feeling that the story is worthy, doesn't always happen. And then the opportunity doesn't always happen. So how did that process start? And how did you really, I guess, get over the imposter syndrome that I think all of us have about knowing that your story was worth telling?
You know, just all the obstacles I've been through and trials and tribulations, it was important for me to let people know you still can do and make it and do anything you want to do, and nothing can get in the way of that. And so it was important for me to do this. I first did a book, I was on hold, and everybody wanted me to do a styling book, and I was so against it, because even if you follow me on social media, you know that you wouldn't even know that I was a stylist. I feel like my purpose here is to make people feel better and to really motivate them and make them laugh sometimes. As you know, my page is crazy. I'm so crazy. Pray for me. But it is important to let people know that you can overcome things. So this process actually took about 5 years, because I did started a styling book, and everybody wanted me to do styling, but I wanted to tell my story. I wanted people to get to know me, because people don't know that side of me. They just know me for being with Destiny's Child and Beyonce. So it was important. And I'm just happy that I finally got a team that was like, when I tell people what I've been through, they're like, this is a movie. And like, let me get the book out first. Let people know. So it was, I'm just happy because you being my friend didn't know this, and people didn't know, like even my mom and my church members and all, like I was just telling them, backstage, like, when you tell your story, you also telling people's story that's part of your story. So it's like changing names and that whole uncomfortable feeling of just anxiety of like, oh my God, how is my church going to take this? How is my family members and my exes? But, it was just important to just bypass all that. I changed names and I really wanted people to get to know me and just get to know you. I feel that my story really relates. You will find something in there that relates to you to just help you get through. And I do these Thai takeaways at the end of each chapter. It's like, I went this way, but I wouldn't change that because it made me who I am. But I also made it a point to give people like a blueprint. You should probably go this way because I'm that way.
It is really inspiring, and I would say the same for all of these books. I know, Clarkisha, in your book, the function of family is similar in the sense of, you can't tell your story without telling theirs. Yeah. But it is a difficult story to read, so I can only imagine how it was to write, to relive those moments. Did you have any trepidation about that, or was it, oh no, we put it on here?
I think so. It was a mix of both. Okay. In terms of, but it's one of those things where, like, if you didn't treat me right, that's on you. So that part was easy. Like, well, if I tell it, I'm gonna tell it in full, obviously. But it was hard to, because it requires a very specific type of vulnerability, because I'm essentially letting people into like the dysfunction that I was a witness of. Mm-hmm. So that part was hard, but since this is the memoir, right? This is the art form. You can't phone it in, because people can tell when you didn't bring everything to a memoir, like when you just kind of put like what you thought people wanted to read versus like what should actually be in there. Mm-hmm. So I tried to approach it as like honestly as I could too.
And it is honest and it is raw. And again, at times it's difficult to read. It's also really hard to turn away. Mm. And I do think that your story, for so many people, will resonate. I think, especially those people who come from families where, and this is, I think, not exclusive to Black families, but there is definitely that thing with parents who discipline in a way that is punitive. It's damning in many ways, and it can be really devastating. Deborah, you have a couple of passages in your book that I was also like, that's rough. Like there's a whole story in your book. I don't want to spoil it for people, but I do want people to know just how like incredibly told this is. One of my favorite of I don't even know what to call them. Do you call them all parables? Do you call them chapters? How would you refer to them?
Myths. That's right.
Okay, one of the myths. Yeah. And this also leans into another very specific aspect of Blackness and anti-Blackness, which is colorism, is this idea of your half-sister having the black beaten off of her in a very literal sense. Yeah. It has everything to do with that style of discipline that we're talking about that is well-meaning but can be really devastating. Yeah. When you're turning something like that, this phrase that we hear all the time as kids, and also relates very much to skin color, colorism, et cetera, being white presenting, being Black presenting, the meaning of that, the meaning of community. I mean, you got a lot done in a few pages there.
Thank you.
Like, how do you transform that into the mythological? Like, it was so effective to me.
I think for me, it was thinking about how do I take it to the farthest extreme of what it could possibly be. We say beat the Black off you, you think violence, but if beat the Black off of you literally means to take the color off of you, right? And to let you live in a world where your color is no longer a place of refuge for you, right? What does that mean? And then I guess back channeling, what is the promise then that your mother's giving you in saying, if you continue down this behavior, right, this is the consequence that's going to come to you. Mm-hmm. I think that there's many more layers to discipline in the Black community specifically than just you got it wrong and we're going to spank you, right? It's deep-seated in enslavement. It's deep-seated in kind of this precursor that we're going to get to the punishment before someone who doesn't have the grace that we have to get to it comes behind us.
It's protective.
It's protective. And I think, you have to be able to see all of that in it, not just what people see as violence.
Yeah, and it's so nuanced. I think that is what makes it so magical, as I keep saying, because, it could have been a very flat telling, but I also think that you so effectively do this thing where so much of the Black existence and so much of what we fight against is this alignment with whiteness, right? This need to be accepted in this other way. And what is dealt with in this moment is what it means not to no longer have the home, to no longer have this as your base, this identity. So effective. Thank you for revisiting that with us, because of the many myths, that was one that I was like, wow. And we'll be right back with more Writing Black. Okay, and we are back with more Writing Black. There's a lot of intimacy in all of these books, emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy. And again, we get to talk about these layers that are happening with these intersecting identities, including the coming out story, or the sexual awakening, if you will, I would say is probably more accurate. I see this most clearly illustrated in both of your stories, and I know for you, obviously it was incredibly complicated, not just by the church, which often becomes a factor, but obviously by the fact that you're also becoming a father at the same time. Do you mind sharing a little bit with us about the process of writing about that when you're trying to obviously be really honest about how that took place, but also protect those loved ones?
It was hard. Like I talked about, switching people's names up and also just everybody found out about everything at the same time. I didn't say I'm writing a book. It was just like, boom, book. And like literally, like it was really, really hard. And I just I was telling them backstage too that one of the lovers that I talk about, I've been like avoiding the calls and all that, and he called on Easter, and it was like he didn't mention the book. So I was like, okay, cool. But no, it was really, really hard. But like I said, I did a speaking in Austin, Texas, for the library there, and most of the people that I talk about in my book, church members and all that stuff, they showed up, and everybody was so supportive, and it was like, it's your story. So, you just got to go for it, and just let it be what it is, because it's all the truth, and it's my story. So.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
Clarkisha, yours is happening in real time, it feels like, because at this age, some of these events are like within the last 5 to 10 years, I assume, that they happen. And it is, I think, very reflective of, on one hand, something I'm really envious of is that increasing openness about being able to talk about sexuality, but it's so fraught. Yeah. And it's so, dramatic in many ways. And you also do that. You do this thing that I really admire. I've not mastered it yet myself as a writer. You write an actual love scene, a couple of them. Yeah. Talk about that for us.
So
this is an art form as far as I'm concerned, so I want to know.
So I will say, so writing those scenes, my coming out story, which I put in quotations because it's a different ball game for Black people. Like, we don't have the benefit a lot of times to like roll out the red carpet and do the fanfare. Like, we have to really negotiate how we're gonna do it depending on our backgrounds and our families. So for this, the fact that I was a late bloomer, hate that terminology, but late bloomer really kind of helped me kind of get over the initial, I would say, nervousness or anxiety about putting those experiences out in the open. Mainly because, when you're a queer person, but like a queer Black person, sex is interesting for us anyway, because we're still trying to navigate on what that means for us, those labels, everything like that. So I really wanted to just kind of be honest about like the messiness of it all, but also make it interesting. Like, everybody likes a good romance. So I was like, let me just put some in there, like some flavor in there for y'all while y'all here. So, I wanted it to be, truthful, vulnerable, but also very entertaining too. Because, this is still a memoir. Yeah. That's one of the functions of it too. Like, you are telling a story, but, people are here for the juicy parts too. So I was like, you put some little in there.
Well, what you also do that's so effective, I mean, you refer to your rom-com brain quite a bit in a book, and I love it because I love a rom-com. But, again, in so doing, you are casting yourself, your self-identified Black, first gen, dark skin, fat self as the heroine in this rom-com. And I was so thrilled to see it because, that doesn't always happen.
No, it doesn't.
And that's why I thought it was so, I guess, imperfectly perfect in the telling, because you position a heroine that we don't see enough. Yeah. So thank you for that. Deborah, another thing that keeps coming up here in these discussions, and it's always going to bring me back to you, is the faith and spirituality piece, because what we're hearing across the board is it's both affirming and inhibiting. I think your book probably most clearly deals with it on the surface level from the very beginning. It's you're bringing us into that realm. Yeah. So I think you're the perfect person to talk about using spirituality as a vehicle in a narrative, why that is significant and how you kind of continue to flesh it out. I know you talked a bit about trying to figure out what you believed in, and your first answer was Jesus. But how did you start to plumb those depths a little bit deeper, and then, of course, start to create your own myths? Like, because it feels very real. It feels very like, you just open the book of the fairy tales or the myths or even parables, and here it is.
Yeah. I think for me, one, I'm a pastor's kid. I'm the good one. Just put that out there. But, so I think that's part of it, is having been entrenched in that culture for so long, it kind of pours out of you. I think also in thinking about, I have a degree in African American studies, and for me, in thinking about the South as a kind of motherland for Black people in this country, then the church has to be part of that motherland, right? Because it was so prevalent in the ways that we structured our culture, and it moved beyond just a belief system, but into something that really ushered our days, right? And so I wanted to find a way to embrace that part of Black culture, right? The South of it, also the church of it, and I think the church for us is a space that is spiritual beyond just one kind of religion. I think for us, we have always been a people that have fused many things together and have found a way to still make it our authentic selves. And so I wanted it to feel like that. I wanted to, by the end of it, you feel like you're in a church service in the best kind of way. You feel redeemed in some way. You feel seen in some way. I think one of the first questions I asked myself in thinking about writing mythology, which was blasphemous from the start, right, was, what does a Black woman and God have in common? And my answer was to be believed. Right? And if I'm going to convince you to believe in me as a Black woman, as maybe a God, what are the things you need to know about me to get you to a level of faith? Right? That you can hear me as honest and true. And so that for me, kind of is a through line to the book.
And a very resonant one.
Yeah, here.
But yes, and I'm going to be borrowing that. I love that. What do a Black woman and God have in common? To be believed. Because we often see that we're not, and it's so vital. Yes, say that. There's also the physicality of it all. You're telling a story, but you're telling a story about real people and real bodies, real experiences, real traumas. All three of you have an experience of physical trauma that happens at some points within these narratives that changes the whole trajectory of everything. And I can't help but imagine that it's like, having yet to attempt the memoir myself would be affirmative. But I can't help but imagine that there's some visceral memory there of like what happens, again, like I didn't know you had ever been shot, which is like such a major thing, and for you was such a pivotal thing. Let's talk about that part of it, the physical part of it, the ability. I know for you too, it also manifests in this like reframing of what ability is and disability, especially for you, Clarkisha. I know you write about that a lot. So I want to get into that topic a little bit, because I think that that's something we don't talk enough about, but it's so real to so many people. So revisiting
being shot,
which I was like, oh.
Well, I'm originally from Austin, Texas, and Austin during that time was very black or white, no gray. It was just blacks over here, whites over here, and if you wanted to mingle a little bit, you go to this place called 6th Street, but it was madness. I I used to work in the medical field. I used to work on artificial heart valves. I used to sit under a microscope and work on artificial heart valves, and I made really, really good money. And my birthday was in 5 days, and we had just elevated to like a bigger position or something like that. So we had a party for us. The party was down the street from the nightclub where all my people be at. So I'm like, I'm gonna do the fun thing with the work people, and then I'm gonna go to the club. Yeah. So I went, and during this time, my favorite song was Lenny Kravitz, "It Ain't Over Till It's Over." So my company bought, my birthday was in 5 days, so this party ended up being like a birthday thing too. So they end up giving me a Walkman and the CD. This shows my age. I'll be 51 in August. But I got the Walkman and the cassette tape of "It Ain't Over Till It's Over." So I'm there, and then I'm like, let's just go to me. The other black guy that was there was like, let's just walk down here for a minute and come back up. So in the process, we go down. I see everybody I haven't seen in a while, and I literally joked with him. I'm like, I must be about to die tonight, because I'm like thinking like it was the best time ever, and I didn't even go in the club yet. Like, it was in the parking lot, and it was like running into people. It was like the energy. Finally, I had to use the restroom. I go to the restroom, and the line is too long, and me being a male is like, okay, I can use the restroom behind the club. And as I go behind the club, these guys showed up with guns, and they put them up to my head, and they're like, where is it? And they end up shooting me in both of my legs. And it was a process, but I'm as sick as this sounds, I'm glad it happened, because it showed me that even being a good person, bullets don't have a face, and you just have to be aware of your surroundings. So this club is known for having fights and shootouts and stuff like every now and then. So why am I going here? And so it just really made me reevaluate myself and just know that, one, be careful, and two, it ain't over till it's over.
And there was a whole period that you weren't sure if you were going to be able to keep healing.
Yeah, I had to learn I was in a wheelchair, walking and all that stuff. It was a process.
Common narrative across this table. Yeah. Clarkisha, yours was interesting to me, your incident. You went to college down the street from where I live now in Hyde Park in Chicago, University of Chicago, shout out. But so much of your injury, as it were, felt, again, like part of this assimilation story. Yeah. You're trying to be a certain size, you're trying to fit into a certain scheme with devastating results. Yeah. And which still affect you today. Am I reading that correctly? Is it did it feel like some sort of betrayal of your body? Did it feel like some, okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, tell me about that. Like, just writing about it and what it looks like to you now versus what it looked like to you then.
Yes. So the injury. So I tore my ACL in college. It was like the second, going into third year college, and it was particularly devastating at that point, because I was, trying to do a thing in college where trying to be super fit, trying to avoid the so-called freshman 15, which there's another conversation to be had another day. But yeah, so I went really hard, and part of that was directed into sports, because very competitive sport. I have a lot of Aries in my chart, so as you know, we love sports, we love competition. I was trying to be my best, trying to be number one, but also trying to keep the weight off, because that was also the other motivation too. Not a great motivation, but So when I did tear my ACL during that fateful soccer game, I was very angry, because I finally thought I was on the right path technically, but obviously finding out throughout that journey, struggling with trying to physically walk again, struggling with also figuring out how to eat, because since I was stationary, I was gaining a lot of weight too, and that was messing with my head. So it did feel like this huge betrayal, because I was like, okay, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, so why would my body do this to me? But then come to find out, I wasn't doing right by my body, which probably led up to the injury. So it was a long, tough process, but it taught me a lot of things in terms of returning back, because I wasn't actually present in my body for a long time. Just kind of going through emotions and being on autopilot and not really being kind to her. Starving her, all of these things, right? But also important lessons she taught me in that, and like physically getting me to sit down and reflect about my life. She taught me that, the whole able body thing is very temporary. It's a temporary experience. That's why we all collectively fear getting old, because we know what happens when we get old. So I think that's why it's important now to start that work. Yeah, I think that's all I would say.
No, I think that's a lot to say. And I think it's incredibly relatable. Deborah, we were having a conversation before we got up here. You prompted a question that I think is one of the best ones you could ask with a memoir. Obviously, none of these people are in old age yet, and I hope they all get there. And, telling your story at this stage is, again, it speaks to that, like, how do you know you have a story to tell yet? Da-da-da-da. But also, what we don't always think about with the memoir is what doesn't make it to the page. I would love for each of you, and I'll start with you, Deborah, to share with us that process of, like, kind of editing yourself down, of making sure that your story remains cohesive and that you're not kind of just throwing everything at the wall because it is, trauma that you need to kind of work out.
Yeah, I mean, omission is definitely a place I was intentional about in the book. I do talk about sexual assault in my book, and the one story I'd never tell you is when it actually happened, because you don't really need to know that, right? Do you really need to see another story of that? I think especially as Black women, we have seen that on film, on stage so much. Instead, I tell you all the times where it almost happened, because I feel like it's equally important for you to know not only this time that someone conquered me in some way, but also all the times that I escaped, right? All the times that I fought it off, that I didn't ask for it, that just kind of centered around me. And so I think definitely I was thinking through that. There's also, other stories that just didn't fit the arc of where I wanted to go with the book. And so there's this great story. It's not great because of what happened, but my grandfather is visited by this cult of women who all pray for him in this very creepy way. And within a week, everyone starts to die in the house. The bird dies first, the dog dies. This is really a thing that happened. And my grandfather dies within about a month of that. And I had this story, and it was definitely leaning more horror, right? Because I was like, I love horror. So I was like, let's do that. But when I sat down to try to put the book together, it just didn't do the thing that I needed it to do. So I think as you come with the editing eye to the work, it is about the individual stories and the individual moments, but it's also about the overall arching, arc of what is the thing I want the audience to leave with. And I think all of us have had to do that work of thinking about what makes it in that way.
Yeah. Clarkisha, how did it show up for you?
For me, it was trying to decide if I should put more scenes about my family, or also trying to decide if I wanted to add more to, like, my separate, like, romantic journeys. And, I decided to essentially keep it cute, as we would say, because you don't want to give too much away, because sometimes you'll mess up the mystique. Sometimes you want to bring an audience in, you want to be vulnerable with them, you want it to be intimate, but you don't want to, like, again, shred the mystique. Like, there should always be some sort of mystery there about the story, where it goes. I've said so many times in terms of, like, modern media, right, that sometimes we don't know how to end things. We don't know how to bring them to close. You'll be watching a show that's been on for 50 seasons. Like, no disrespect, but at some point we do want to, we want to wind the story down. So that's kind of what I was thinking with those particular stories. And then also was my thing too, where, like, sometimes I don't want to share everything. Sometimes there are some stories that are just for me. So
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot. And you are dead on about closure. Yeah. What did editing and omission look like for you?
Saving lives.
Please explain.
No, it just like what the lady said, just some things I don't know. It was so juicy. Like, this book was so juicy. It was like, take that out. I don't even want to give that person that kind of attention.
Right.
It's just like some people just don't deserve that type of attention.
Yeah.
So you just strip it and put that, more of, things that are more important, and that's kind of how it was. Just saving lives was what I say. Now, if anything goes to film, if you trust me, I will be putting some of this stuff in there. Yeah, but for now,
I kept it a few times. I'm waiting to hear about the deal. Okay.
Yes, but yeah, it's not worth it, and I love the fact that some people will grab this book and don't see anything about them.
They're not part of your story.
No, it's not even worth it.
Really? Well, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to continue with you for a second, because I think, when we think of memoir, well, at least when I think of memoir, I'll speak for myself, I do think of something that feels cathartic. I have come to understand from different writers that's not always the case. Was this a cathartic experience for you, and how?
It was because I've never been in therapy, I've always been everybody else's therapist. And so when you finally write things out and relive things, you kind of understand patterns of why things happen the way they do. I truly believe everything happens the way it's supposed to. It was a learning experience simply because like me and my dad's relationship really didn't get as close as it did to his final days. Both of my parents were diagnosed with cancer at the same time. And my dad, I never left his side. And I learned so much about him. And I learned that me being a gay man, when all the men in my life treated me special, like my uncles and cousins, like we would play football, they wouldn't tackle me, they'd be like, you scored. You know, they always like treated me a little bit better, and they saw something in me before I saw it in myself. I learned so much about my dad, and he took me to Diana Ross concert when I was a kid. My dad is so into sports, and I never paid attention until I started writing the book. I was like, why would this man take me to, and that is what sparked fashion. That is what sparked and made me become who I am today, is Diana Ross. And so, you know, when you finally lay things out, you kind of understand why things happen the way they did. So that was my therapy, this whole book. And I'm a little shaky because, you know, it is touching.
It is touching. That is a gorgeous answer.
Man.
Clarkisha, how was it cathartic for you?
Well, Ty really spelled it out. It's like when I also process by writing. So there were a lot of sentiments and feelings about my initial upbringing, my childhood, that were kind of resolved for me, because one of the things, like, I don't talk to any of my family anymore. I went no contact with all of them, which more of us should do, just to let y'all know. So, you know, there are things I couldn't talk to them about anymore because I don't talk to them, period. So having it written out on paper in the book was just phenomenal in terms of like finally making those connections as to, like Ty said, why this happened, how this happened, and why it had to happen like this. Because sometimes we don't like that, and there are some things that happened to me that I wish didn't, but at the end of the day, I know that they kind of had to happen to get me to where I am now. So yeah, it was very cathartic in that sense, like just making connections that I couldn't make all those years ago. And kind of making my life make sense now too.
I like that idea of like making things make sense. And, you know, for our writer at the end here, Deborah, who has crafted an entire mythology about it, how did this kind of like close those circles for you?
I mean, I definitely had a lot of pieces that I hadn't talked to people in my family about, and then those open doors in the same ways, or I wrestle with things. But one of the biggest kind of surprise moments of catharsis for me was in crafting mythology. One of the myths is centered on my daughter at 6 years old comes to me and she's freaking out, and I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, I don't have a thigh gap. It's like, why at 6 do you care? Right? Like, I'm like, oh, why is that? But that's right, the world she lives in and how she sees the world around her. And to be able to craft a myth that explains to her, like, your knees kiss because somewhere in your past, you know, there was a village of alligators, and the only way to get away from them was to sway your hips in a way that hypnotized everyone, right? And like, baby, your body is built off survival, right? Like, there's everything in you is right. And to see her see that as like utter truth, right? There's no other option in her mind. And to know that that's the kind of work that I'm writing is one that lets young girls, lets women now see themselves in a way that reclaims something, that closes the gaps for them. As much as there's parts of it that are for me, I think that community part is probably the part that I'm the most proud of, and the part that resonates in me, you know, going forward.
I love that answer. And I loved all three of these books. And we could really sit and talk about them all day, but I also want to give you all a chance to ask questions of all three of these writers, because there's so much to dig into here. Also, again, I want to thank the LATimes for taping this session, so it will be available also on the LATimes Podcast Network. Sure. Got to put that in there. But are there any questions? I'm going to start right here in the middle.
I have two questions. The first one I'm going to direct to Deborah. I've read a lot of autobiographies, and yet in reading yours, it was reading more lyrical, very poetic. It was a very different style of writing than I've ever read before, and it was so much fun to read because I'm not, this happened first, I like the whole lyricism. Did you do it naturally, or was it very, very, very intentional?
Sure, I will say intentional to make myself sound better. The reality is I'm a poet, and that's never going to change. I've tried to stop being a poet, and then it's like the trees moved with such, and I'm like, here it goes again, right? So I think that everything I write just has a certain lyricism to it, and I've kind of started to learn how to embrace that as my brand, as my style, instead of fighting against it and trying to be something else. Yeah.
Okay, my second question, unless you want someone else.
No, you got it. You got the mic.
Anyway, my second question is, I'm a writer, and I will never write my autobiography because it means ripping off the scabs and showing everyone your scars, the pain. What was your turning point when you realized you would have to do this? It would be an incredibly painful experience, and yet you had to work through it. What was a motivation, an intention, a goal to do it, and to do it, period?
All right. Well, we started this in last time. Deborah, I'm going to start with you, and we'll work our way back.
Sure. I've spent most of my career as a performance poet, aka an oversharer. And so getting on stage and sharing all of my business has been something I've done for over a decade. I wouldn't call this painful. I think that there was actually a visibility that was quite enjoyable in writing the book, of knowing that I would be able to not have to hold the secrets anymore, but that I could put them down and literally put them down and walk away from them. And it didn't mean that they didn't exist anymore. It just meant that I didn't have to carry them. And so I think that there is an unburdening that comes with autobiography and with writing memoir, that if seen through that lens, there's a freedom in it that's much less a burden. Yeah.
You might have just convinced me to go.
Come on now. Let's go.
Clarkisha.
Well, similar to Deborah, I have done public work in that I've written countless articles about snippets of my life and sometimes the traumatic points. But yeah, I definitely did have a shit hits the fan moment when talking about my family, because I also had to talk about a particular sibling relationship that was painful, that I hadn't talked about at length in my other work. So once I kind of got on that subject, I was like, okay, this is definitely the point where I could say fuck it and not talk about this, or I could be honest and talk about it, mostly because once again, when you're queer and you're Black, our relationships with our families are so complex. So I thought about that, and I was like, well, I can't phone it in, even if I want to, because that was a very intrinsic part of my story. I really had to think about that. Do I want to half-ass my story? Do I want to have holes in it? Or do I want to tell something that's, for one, complete? So, yeah, I really had to, punch my pride in the face a lot while writing this book. And I think it was a good exercise. I feel like more of us should undergo some ego deaths. It's necessary. I feel like if more people did that, our world might not look as crazy right now.
If that's not an endorsement, I don't know what is. Again, I'm feeling encouraged. Yeah.
I've always been transparent. I would definitely say my anxiety during this book was basically trying to save other people and worry about other people, because I'm that kind of guy. But I had to bite the bullet and just say go. And once you turn 50, this tongue just do what it do. And so you don't care. But yeah, it's very freeing. I feel very light once I did it. The anxiety was the first 3 days of the release date because of the people that I do talk about. But being that I changed their names, they know who they are. So you get a call and say, so I'm such and such. Yes, you are. But yeah, it's a freeing experience, and you feel lighter. And yeah, I'm glad I did it. I wouldn't change a thing.
I love it. Next question. Yes.
My question weighs to naming people. And so how do you weigh the balance of like changing someone's name when you're writing something like nonfiction and like actually including their name?
It is loaded.
Well, like I said, they know who they are. But, you know, when you tell your story, you're telling the story of other people as well. So it's like, if you're not going to communicate with that person, then it's important to, like, for their privacy. And I mean, people do the math and add it up, but you just got to go for it. And that's what I did. And just, I was blessed that I didn't have any bad karma with mine as of yet. You know, when things get bigger, things tend to do a remix.
That's
But
true.
Stand prayed up.
I thought you were actually quite graceful with
I
a lot of people. Like,
until it's time to do a film, I'm going in. Yeah.
okay, it's gonna get juicy. You do a lot of this as well, Clarkisha. A lot of pseudonyms.
Lots of pseudonyms.
So
Yes. So I'm gonna be honest with you. A lot of it has to do with legalities. You know, I'm not trying to get sued. I'm too sexy to be sued. But anyways, that was part of it. As a survivor too of lots of abuse, you have to be worried about that, because even if you are telling your story and you're telling the correct story, there might be someone out there that doesn't want you to tell that particular story. So you got to cover your ass. So that's kind of what I was thinking about when I was writing. Like, I am going to tell this story, but I'm going to give myself enough, I guess, plausible deniabilities so that if this person decides to come out, that's on you, because no one actually knew who you were. You then identify yourself. So it's one of those things where, like, I kind of wanted to create a catch-22 situation for that person. So that's kind of how I thought it. Like, first protect myself, but also in the event that you do decide to come out, that's your cross to bear, excuse me.
now you were obviously writing mythology, but how did you handle this situation?
Yeah, I thought about it. If I was going to honor you, I was going to name your name.
Oh, okay.
You know, and if I wasn't, then I changed your name. Right? That's so I left actually a lot of original names. And then I took some people who I wanted to dishonor and I made them a god and another thing that was just a villain. Right? And it was like, haha, oh, you're over there. There's your name. It's over there. And so I think, you know, being able to bend that line, I also decided to do things like incorporate other names because I was able to create characters, right? So I created a character named Akarema. If anybody studies sociology, it's just America backwards, right? And America is the god of doubts, because why wouldn't it be? Oh, it does make us doubt ourselves. And so thinking about things like that, of how do I bring in redlining? How do I bring in America? You know, these other things kind of tied into how I use names within the book.
All right. There is a question right down here from a special little person. We love this question. I know already. We love the question.
What inspired you to write a book about your life?
Clarkisha, why don't you get us started?
So initially, I actually didn't. The book came about because of my agent. Shout out to Claire Draper of the band Agency. I initially wanted to write a Western, which is still in the works.
I love this.
But, you know, I was talking to them, and, you know, Westerns are niche, right? And, you know, I'm a new writer. So they're like, I like that idea, but consider this. And they were like, why don't you do a memoir? I didn't think, like you stated earlier, I didn't think I was old enough. I was like, I'm not even 30 yet. But sometimes it takes somebody else close to you in your circle to let you know that you do actually have a story to tell. Like, a lot of stories to tell, actually. So they're like, you know, I've watched you the last couple of years. Like, you've given us a lot. And I feel like it's time to really, like, put it together. So after that, I was like, okay, let's do it. So that's kind of how it came to be.
And aren't we glad it did?
Yeah.
Deborah, back to you.
Yeah, I've been writing about my life for a long time. So it was just about thinking about if I wanted to put it in a book or not. Right? I think I could have done a lot of things. I could have made a stage play. I could have written an opera. I could have done it in a lot of different forms.
She's done all these things.
But a book felt like it was something that could live on beyond me in a different way, where it could live with people and people could live with it. You know, the beauty about a book is you don't have to buy a ticket 1,000,000 times to read it over and over again. Right? You bought it once and it lives with you. And so I wanted my story to be able to live with people like that.
That's my favorite thing about books.
Yeah.
Ty?
It just felt like time. It just, you know, I was doing COVID. I was FaceTiming friends and just wasting days. And it's like, okay, let me be productive and do something. And I've always wanted to tell my story. They wanted me to do a styling book, but once I started telling people my story, it was like, this should be a movie, this should be a book. And so that's kind of how it happened during COVID. And I'm just glad I completed it. I never had author in my to-do list, but you know, like I said, she was saying, like, you communicate your life sometimes to people and they're like, this should be a book. And it just felt like the timing was right.
Do you all take the time to congratulate yourselves for this incredible feat and how you make people feel and how all of us, even some people who haven't read these books yet, feel like they are relating to you?
No.
Go, Deborah.
No. I want to be honest with you. No, I suck at it. You know, my husband will tell you, like, I'm just like, next thing, right? And I need to be better at it. So I'm just not going to lie. No, I don't. And I should be better. And you're reminding me to be better. So thank you.
Clarkisha.
Same way. Once I accomplish one goal, I'm like, okay, what's next? So it hasn't sunken in yet. Like, cause my book came out on March 7th. So I keep forgetting that's when it happened. It's very recent.
Yeah.
I should do that more, but I don't. Yeah.
I would have to say I felt it when I started doing it because of Beyonce wrote the foreword, and so she gave me flowers. Billy Porter wrote the afterword. He gave me flowers. And on the back of the book, I had contacted people that I admire and loved, and they all wrote, from Tina Knowles to Michelle Williams, Kelly Rowland, Rosario Dawson, Billy Porter, Jennifer Hudson, Tashina Arnold, Kelly Osbourne, and Naomi Campbell all gave me flowers. So it was like, just the overall, this whole process has been uplifting, and I pat myself on the back all the time.
Good. Well, that is fun. Well, if you won't congratulate yourselves, I would love to congratulate you. I'm sure that our audience would love to congratulate you on the incredible feat of telling your own story. We want to thank the LATimes Book Festival, the crew, the volunteers, our engineer back there who's taping this, all of you who attended, thank you so much. Please get into these books, guys. Hold your books up, please, so that people know.
Yeah.
Okay, we got Black Chameleon by Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton, Fat On, Fat Off by Clarkisha Kent, and Makeover from Within by Ty Hunter. I'm Maiysha Kai. You can find me at theGrio. Thank you guys so much for having us.
And we'll be right back with more Writing Black. Okay, and we are back with more Writing Black. Now, of course, in the context of that incredible conversation, my favorites this week might be a little bit obvious. I highly recommend Makeover from Within, Fat On, Fat Off, and Black Chameleon. However, one of the things that fascinated me so much about this conversation was the different forms a memoir can take, like how creative we can get in telling our own stories. And so another one that I would recommend that I just think is so incredible is the book Dear Senderen. This is a book by Nigerian author Akweke Meze, who is a non-binary author. I think I've probably mentioned them before. This particular work is so searing, so personal, so is staggering. I found myself so deeply moved reading this work, this journey through gender and writing and family and money and love and loss. And I think when we talk about memoirs, there is this excavating that has to happen, this peeling back of layers that happens when you are revealing yourself to the world. And what Akweke does here is really just tremendous. So I highly recommend Dear Senderen if you have a chance to pick that up. And obviously also our three authors featured today. And we hope you will join us soon for another episode of Writing Black. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of Writing Black. As always, you can find us on the TheGrio app or wherever you find your podcasts.
You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
The 80s gave us unforgettable songs from Bob Marley, De La Soul, and Public Enemy.
I'm a black man, and I can never be a veteran.
Being Black the 80s is a podcast docuseries hosted by me, Torre, looking at the most important issues of the 80s through the songs of the decade.
Can I have another hit? The dope man said, "Club, I don't give
a decade when crack kingpins controlled the streets, but lost their humanity.
You couldn't be like no soft, smiling, happy-go-lucky drug dealer. You had to suppress that.
It was a time when disco was part of gay liberation.
It provided the information to counter narratives that were given to gay people by the straight world.
This is the funkiest history class you'll ever take. Join me, Torre, for Being Black the 80s on the GRIO Black Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts.